My name is Sheena Paulus. I am an adult gymnast as well as a pregnancy and postpartum corrective exercise specialist. Tonight's call is going to be all about screening for pelvic floor issues in adult gymnasts. These screenings can be used for kids, but I figured it would be best if I focused on the group that I work with primarily. But like I said, the information is applicable for all ages. So when we are looking at our pelvic floor, there's a lot of things that are inside that we really can't see, but there's a lot of things that we can see and affect with just a little bit of information. So my goal for tonight is to give you guys all that information so that you can take better care of your body and you can seek additional help if you end up needing to do so. So what you'll want to have for tonight available, if possible, is a spot on the floor, a chair to sit on, a relatively soft ball, such as a pinky ball or a tennis ball can do as well. No lacrosse balls, that won't feel too good. You want to have a hand towel, as well as a yoga block or a foam roller. If you don't have one of those things, no worries, but having that will allow you to participate most fully in tonight's kind of the try as we go type part of it. And so I'll give everybody a moment to grab any of the items that they might need. Okay, so one of the main concerns people come to me with their pelvic floor is that they'll say that they experience leaking while they're doing activities. Sometimes it's a sport, sometimes it's when they sneeze or cough. Sometimes it's just randomly during the day or later on in the night as they're fatiguing. So no matter what scenario you're experiencing this, it is something that is very common, but it's actually not normal. Our body is designed to prevent that. And if we are experiencing leaking, it is a tip off that something is amiss in our pelvic floor. Now, of course, the higher impact we're doing, so if we're doing tumbling or vault, of course, that's a higher demand in our body. So what that means is we just need to be that much stronger to be able to handle that force. So it's not to say if you do experience leaking, there's something wrong with you or you shouldn't do sports. That is not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it's a sign for us that we are going to have a little bit more in the way of possibility that we can build our muscles up. And by doing so, we can minimize that leaking so that we aren't having that. And when you are leaking, it's not just about the leaking, which of course nobody wants, but it's a sign that our body is under distress. It's kind of like having a limp when you have a hurt ankle. Obviously, we don't want to be in that situation. So I do suggest that you work on this issue while it's still relatively minor and you don't want to let things get worse. So we will know that this gives us information that we might have to do a little bit more in the way of TLC for our pelvic floor if we experience leaking, but that's just one of the symptoms that can be a tip off for us. Before we dive a little bit deeper here, I did want to mention that if you find tonight that you have a pelvic floor issue, then I do suggest if you were thinking about working on any diastasis recti issues, which are another common athlete issue and common postpartum, you'd want to hold on that because if you have pelvic floor issues and you go ahead and work on a diastasis, you actually can worsen your pelvic floor issues. So chain of command of what I like to suggest is we screen for pelvic floor issues, we make sure that we don't have that, and then we can dive more into our diastasis work. And I did touch on that a little bit in our earlier calls, just so that we could make sure that everybody knows that information. And so aside from leaking, the other symptoms we want to watch out for to indicate to us we might have a pelvic floor that's a bit more on the tight side versus the loose side. I'm going to give you guys more information on that. So if we have a tight pelvic floor or a loose pelvic floor, we could experience leaking. However, I find that most gymnasts are going to err on the side of too much tightness. Now, just like any other muscle, a muscle that's overworked is going to be tighter. And a muscle that's tight is actually not necessarily strong because it will be tired all the time and therefore it ends up feeling weak. So if you always have a cramp in your bicep and you try to go climb the rope, you're not going to be able to do it because your bicep is exhausted. And that's really what our pelvic floor can have. And so the pelvic floor is oftentimes going to be bearing the brunt of the rest of our body, which is one of the reasons why I have covered a lot of other parts of our body in some of these calls. I'm going to dive more into this later, but I just wanted to give you guys an overview on that. So other symptoms besides leaking, which in gymnasts is normally going to be a sign of tightness, we can have a feeling of heaviness in our pelvic region. We can have a burning sensation when we pee that is not associated with a UTI. So if you test and there's no UTI and it's burning when you pee, that's a tip off that you probably have tighter muscles. Kegals, we're going to talk about those, but real quick for right now, if you try to do a Kegel, which long story short is to draw your pelvic floor up and then let it descend down. If you try to do that and you feel like you just can't reach that muscle, then you are going to be also possibly a candidate for tightness. Can be weakness, but like I said, in gymnasts, I usually find that we are going to be more on the tightness scale here. I'm just going to pin me real quick because for the recording purposes. Does anybody have any questions about what I just said? Awesome. This is going to get a lot more clear as I keep going, I promise. So one thing that's really nice to know is that working on our breathing patterns really helps. And that's one of the reasons why it's hard for me to decide what order I wanted these calls to be in, because we did a lot of breath work in our diastasis calls. We're going to do an exercise together in just a second, working on our breathing patterns, and I will show you guys what I'm talking about. So as we get ready for that, I just wanted to mention real quick that we actually have 3 diaphragms in our body. A lot of people just think about this one, the diaphragm at the bottom of their lungs. So we have that diaphragm, our middle diaphragm. We also have a diaphragm at our neck and one in our pelvic floor. The 3 of them are designed to work as a unit. So we inhale, they move down. As we exhale, they move up. And that's pumping the air in and out of our body. If those diaphragms aren't working as well, then what we have is we have dysfunction in our breathing system. And when we have even one of the diaphragms not working well, that's going to impact our pelvic floor because it's on the bottom of those muscles. So right now, what I'd like you all to do is we're going to work on how our breathing affects our pelvic floor. So I'd like everybody to grab a chair. Any chair should do, although I do prefer slightly firmer if we have the choice. And we're going to go ahead and have a seat here. Nice and relaxed, comfortable way of sitting. And what we're going to do is imagine that our body is like a house. Our pelvic floor is the basement of the house. Our waistband is level 1. Belly button is level 2. Level 3 is our chest. Level 4 is our neck. And level 5 is the top of our head. So what we're going to do now is take a deep breath. And I want you to feel, how deep does the breath go? Does it go to the second floor, the first floor? Does it go all the way down to the basement? Does it go out the basement window? These are all possibilities. And there's no right or wrong answer. I just want you to feel this. So go ahead and take a deep breath in. And breathe out. And the first one's kind of just getting acclimated. So after that, go ahead and take another one and see if you can notice how deep your breath goes. Good. And you can take another one. And so this gives us information about how our breath is working for us or not so much. So when I breathe in, I generally feel right around the first floor. I don't generally feel like it's all the way to the basement. It is best if you can feel that your breath goes down to your pelvic floor. And what it feels like is almost like just a little bit of movement. Obviously, your lungs aren't down there. You don't feel that. But what you should feel is you should feel your breath descending down and then coming up. And it's almost like a trampoline, which is a good analogy for gymnastics. But that's what we want it to feel like. And so if we're stopping higher than that, that's telling us that we have tightness, which is more like what I have. I tend toward tightness. And then we also have somebody who they might feel like their breath goes out the pelvic floor, all the way out the basement window. That's going to be an individual that's more likely to have looseness. So as we go through these tests, just make a mental note. You might be a blend, some people are. So you want to just note, did I feel, that this test I was tight, this test I was loose? And then after we do a few of them, you should come to a conclusion of, oh, okay, I, had more on this category kind of thing. Okay, so the next test that we're going to do is you'll grab your yoga block. And we are going to place the block between our knees. You can use a foam roller as well. And all we're going to do here is we're going to squeeze the block. And then you can relax and squeeze. Now, as you're squeezing and holding, I want you to try to tell, is one of my inner thighs working harder than the other? If you can't tell by feeling, you can always palpate your muscles and feel them and see if you can tell with your hands which one is working harder. Now, if you have one side that's clearly working harder than the other, that's going to be a sign that that side of your pelvic floor might tend toward tightness. And oftentimes we actually have one side of the pelvic floor that is tighter, particularly if we've given birth and we've had a bit of trauma on that side. So again, we're just gathering information tonight. I will be giving you guys a few action steps, but I can't do everything in one class. So obviously we have to have a limit to how much we're going to cover. But this is the most important call of all because you're actually learning more about your body. And so you want to take note if you feel like one leg is working harder than the other. Now what we're going to do is grab the pinky ball and we'll use the same chair. So what we're going to do here is we're literally going to sit on the ball. I'm going to show you sit just in standing so you can see. We're going to place the ball at various points around one of our sit bones and give ourselves a little massage. So it's not always the most comfortable thing, but hopefully you can find a way of relaxing over the ball. So maybe not putting all your pressure over it. If there's a super sensitive spot, of course you can avoid that. But we're trying to just work around and spend a few seconds over a variety of spots and just kind of checking out what's going on. You can explore both sides, really allowing yourself to relax. The pelvic floor is a part of our body that a lot of people will guard unconsciously during the day. And you might not even realize the muscles are as tense as they are. And so for me, I find that my right side is generally a lot tighter. My right side butt is tighter as well. A lot of gymnasts, I notice, and generally athletes have tighter right sides. I also find that a lot of non-athletes do because when we drive, most of us are using our right foot for the whole time. And so that's one instance where we use the right a little bit more. There's also postural things that come into play. But again, you're taking note, is my right side tighter, is my left? Sometimes if we have had injury to one of our sides, that will flip it. And even if we used to be one way, it can actually switch. So this is the type of thing, if you get injured or you have a leg change, you have a baby, whatever it is, you can come back and revisit these tests because your body isn't static, it's going to change throughout what you go through in life. So does anybody have any questions about those three tests? Awesome. All right. So then I'm going to jump into the face down work. So for this one, you'll want to lie face down on the floor. And we're going to explore glutes versus hamstrings and how those are working for you. And so one thing you guys have to know is that the stronger your glutes are, the less work your pelvic floor has to do. It's like any other part of our body. If one muscle is not strong enough, the muscles around it are going to have to work overtime. And nobody likes working overtime. So we're going to lie down. And what I'm going to have you do is place your hands over your butt cheeks. What you're going to do next is squeeze just your right side. And then relax it. Squeeze just the right side again. And relax it. Squeeze that side and lift your leg. Take notice, is your glute working harder or is your hamstring working harder? Relax, squeeze your glute, lift your leg. What's working harder? Take note of that and know that if your glute is not working harder than your hamstring, that means your glutes are a bit sleepy and they're not necessarily doing their job for your body during the day. Let's try the left side, squeeze and lift. Sometimes by feeling the different side, you actually will have more confidence reporting what you feel on one, because you'll say, oh, wow, on my left side, my glute's great, and on the right side, it's actually not as good. And so sometimes just doing the different sides can give us more comparison, because I think for most people, you know, what they're doing just feels normal to them because it's what they always would do. But then you compare the sides and you can really see. So we do want to make sure our glutes are working harder than our hamstrings. You can simply work that exercise as a way to get that action stronger. You can lie on your belly and you can squeeze your glute. If you have trouble getting your glute, no matter how hard you're trying, you can always put a rolled up towel right across your hips like this. And that can be an easier way for some people to find their glutes. There's many other things you can do, but we're trying to stay in scope with this call and not get too off track. But if anybody needs extra help with that, you can always email me. I'll pop my email into the chat and I'll be able to answer your questions that way too. If anybody's shy about asking here. That's my email. Okay. So let's see. So that's another, sign of if our glute is weaker, it can then make our pelvic floor work harder. And I've had a lot of women where I've helped their glutes get stronger and lo and behold, their pelvic floor issues get better. So it's pretty cool how like sometimes the solution is in a different part of your body than you would have thought. And I did want to take a moment here to address kegals. So I had mentioned before, drawing up the pelvic floor. So a kegel, if you can imagine that you've got a napkin as the base of your pelvic floor and you're drawing that up, like you're picking something up with the napkin and then you're bringing it back down. That's what we're doing with the muscles when we do a kegel. Now, if you try kegels and they make your symptoms worse, it probably means that you have pelvic floor tightness. Because like I said, if you have a muscle that's already irritated and it's already overworked, the last thing it needs is more work. So please don't do kegels if they make you worse. That said, we are going to go over kegels together and different ways we can do them later for those that feel that they could benefit from them, which are going to be generally more of the people with the weaker pelvic floors. But before that, we're going to keep on the glute theme. And I want to teach you guys what we call a top-down glute squeeze. So here's my glute. This is my top of it, middle, and my bottom, okay? And so ideally when we squeeze our butt, I know in gymnastics, the coaches are always like, squeeze your butt, which is fine. It's just that a lot of times when gymnasts squeeze their butt, they think of it like clench their cheeks together, kind of like they're trying to squeeze a pencil between there. That can cause a lot of pelvic floor tightness, particularly in our rear pelvic floor, because there are different sides. We've got the front, the rear, the sides, all of different, tightnesses we can have in these different areas. So that one can cause a lot of rear pelvic floor tightness. I get that in some skills, we really have to do it to stay on the equipment. I get that, but when we're living our day, we don't want to be doing that during our other workouts, during our conditioning, or during daily living in general. So top down glute squeeze, if I say squeeze your glute, you want to try to feel that the top squeezes first, this part, and then the bottom. And obviously that's like slow motion and that isn't going to happen during a skill. But if you can do that in standing and you can squeeze top, middle, bottom, and feel free to put your hands on your butt because when you can feel it with your hand, it's a lot easier to learn versus trying to imagine it and not being sure if you're doing it. When I work with people, in person, I very rarely touch them. And it's not just because I don't want to get in trouble. It's because when we feel our own muscles with our hands, we learn so much more from that. So I think it's a great tool. And obviously it's kind of embarrassing to do that in public, but you're not in public right now, hopefully, so you can practice. So top down glute squeeze is a great drill. You can always do sets of 5 to 10 of those. You can do both cheeks. You can do one and then the other. You can try it in different positions. You could do it, face down. You could do it standing up. All of that's great stuff. The other thing that you can work on if you have some tightness is hinging. So for hinging, this one looks super easy, but I promise you it is worth working on. So like everybody should try this. You're going to stand up, feet are hip distance apart. What you're going to do is you're going to step directly back. You're going to bend your leg and sit back into your hips. So it looks from the side kind of like a karate chop. And then you can switch sides, step back and bend. And you're probably thinking, why am I doing this? It's silly. Well, while you're doing it, I'm going to show you guys from the back. If you step back and your butt kind of swings up that way, or you spin your butt or spin it that way versus straight back, that's your body trying to get out of going back. And what we're doing here is we're opening up our glutes and muscles around our sit bones called our deep hip rotators. And if you watch yourself in a mirror or on a video that you take of yourself, I promise you, very few people I meet can actually sit straight back. And so doing sets of those can be a great way to warm up. It can be a great awareness piece. And then anytime you're doing a lunge or anything like that, where you're doing single leg work, be mindful that your hips are staying straight, because that can be a habit that we fall into, and it's going to accentuate any imbalances we might have left to right in our hips. And by the way, if anybody has questions as we're going, you can interrupt me, because I want to answer all your questions. Okay, so we're getting through some of the test stuff, but if you feel like you're spinning and you can't stay straight, that's another indication you might be tighter. There are also reasons that we can be, or ways of telling if we're having a looser pelvic floor, and I'll be going over those in a moment. I did want to mention, while we're still on the tightness subject, the just in case pee. Everybody does it. We all know what that is. Kids and stuff like that, like, I get it. You sometimes have to do it. However, it is not the healthiest thing for our pelvic floor. Our bladder is designed to work in a manner that it will fill up with fluid. And once it's filled, it then has a sensation of wanting to empty. And if we pee before that has been reached, we are going to tend to make our pelvic floor tighter and more irritated. So try to avoid the just in case pee unless you really need it, because it can cause harm to our body. The other thing that you want to do is make sure that you're getting enough pure water. When we dilute our urine, that helps our pelvic floor stay happy, as well as our bladder. And if we're peeing in a higher concentration, it can cause pelvic floor tightness. So keep in mind too, as we start going through the loose category, pelvic floor tightness can come and go. If you have a really hard workout, just like with any other part of your body, if you're straining to do a max deadlift or brand new vault, you're straining and clenching every single muscle you have. That's going to cause all of our muscles to become tight. So it's not always like, I'm just this or just that. It's just like somebody that has back problems and they have a spasm one day and then the next day they're fine. So don't ever feel like you're just in one category forever and that's it, because it's not like that. And so if you're in a pattern where you're tight, I would stop kegals until the tightness is better, because they are just going to make things worse. So this would actually be a good time to practice our kegals. Now, if you tested that you were tight, I don't recommend you try these. If you're super curious and you want to do a couple, that should be okay, but don't do too many, because it can cause harm. So what we want to do with these is we do want to find a way to recline back a bit in our chair. And if you don't have a chair like me that's got a slant, you can always use a pillow to help yourself, because you want to be at a bit of an angle here. So basically, like, bed down on the couch, I'm relaxing, I'm kind of just letting the couch or chair support me. And what I'm going to have you guys do next is place your hands right over your lower belly. You're going to relax your pelvic floor completely, no tension. And then we're going to draw the pelvic floor up, like I just described, of the napkin kind of pulling up. Hopefully you feel a little bit of tension under your hands. And the reason is our pelvic floor and our TA, or our transverse abdominis muscles that wrap around our midsection, work as a team. If you don't feel that, if you don't feel any tension on your hands, and it's not much, it's around 10 to 20%, that's a sign that something in your system has gotten off track. You can relax your pelvic floor. And this is a great time to check in and really feel, have I been able to relax it completely, or is there a little bit more relaxation there? If you need to relax twice to really relax, that's a dead giveaway that you have a tight pelvic floor. And if you have a tight pelvic floor and you choose to do any kegels under any circumstance, you have to make sure you relax your pelvic floor completely after you do a rep, because if you don't, you're really going to set off the tightness. So drawing up and then relaxing, feeling for that lower ab engagement. If you don't have that connection with lower abs and pelvic floor, then please send me an email and I will give you a few other things you can work on. As far as the next way we can do this, so one way to do Kegel is drawing up, relaxing. We can also try 10-second holds. I'm not going to do that tonight with you guys, but just know that you can do a 10-second hold. And to really work on pelvic floor strength, which you would primarily want to do if you have pelvic floor looseness, you would try to make a goal of 5 reps of 10-second holds, making sure you can fully relax each time. The other fun one to work on, and this one's really good for athletes, is quick flicks. With quick flicks, we're gonna contract pelvic floor, relax it, contract, relax, contract, relax. It's like the pace of kind of bouncing a ball, really, really quick. And that one is really good because when we're doing a quick skill that takes tension in our body, like a punch front or hitting a vault board, we would actually want our pelvic floor to naturally do that. But a lot of people have become very sleepy and they don't have that connection anymore, particularly after childbirth. And so working on the quick flicks can be really helpful. You can start with 5 or 10, but as you get better at it, work your way up to 30. And that's a great way to strengthen your pelvic floor. Whenever you try this stuff, start slow. Even though it feels like a small muscle, it can be a really bad scene if you overdo. So just start slow, see how you feel the next day. If you feel good, you could do more. You can work on something like Kegel every day if you have weakness, but again, most gymnasts I meet are more on the tight side, so I don't generally prescribe a lot of them for gymnasts. All right, so basically in terms of the loose pelvic floor, there's a few things we can look out for. One would be if you had a really hard time doing that exercise we just went over, that's going to give you a signal of, I might have a loose pelvic floor. And I will give you guys this much. It is tricky because there's some overlap. Like you can have a hard time doing a Kegel because you're tight, and you can have a hard time doing it because you're loose. And I wish it were simpler, but it is what it is. So if you ever have the sensation like you have a tampon in there and it's falling out on you, even if it doesn't actually fall out, but like you feel like it's falling out, that's a sign your pelvic floor is a bit looser than we would want. Certainly, if it does fall out, that would be the extreme level. The other thing that you can do is you can check your pelvic floor strength with how far you can change your tampon. So if you have the tampon string hanging out and you draw your pelvic floor up and you can pull it up about 1 inch so that the string gets about 1 inch shorter, and then you can let that go and it's 1 inch longer, that's an A+. That's a good level of strength. If you can't make it move that much, we're on the tip off that it's a little bit of a weaker pelvic floor, which again can be because your pelvic floor is tight. So it can be complicated. And if you feel like you're super confused, like just reach out to me and I can help further. If sex doesn't feel like it used to feel and you feel like the sensations aren't there, of course, there could be other reasons for that, but that can be another sign. Let's see. And then talking about the rear pelvic floor, because like I said, we have front, we have rear, and then we have even left and right for the pelvic floor. And so if we have trouble passing gas, like we know it's there and it's not coming out, that can be another sign that we do have a tight rear pelvic floor. We can still work Kegels with the rear or the front. It's just all, very close in area, but just keep in mind that if you go to a doctor and say your pelvic floor doesn't feel right, and they just look at your vagina, then they might be missing something if they don't look everywhere, because there's a difference for some people with the rear versus the front. Now I had mentioned glutes. That's one of the things that we can use to help our pelvic floor. The other thing we can use for a clue for how our body is doing is our feet. So if you're a person that stands all the time like this, which, if you have a back in a dance, you might do, but basically when our feet are turning out this much, it's generally a sign that we have really tight, deep hip rotators, which are muscles in our butt. And that can be genetic, or it can be from environment, from what you do all the time. And so that one is going to be more of an indication of tight pelvic floor. I very rarely see people with turned out feet that have loose pelvic floors. It's almost always tight pelvic floors. The other cool thing to know is that general core strength can really help our pelvic floor when it's done properly. There's been some research that has shown that people who enroll in a Pilates program generally can help their pelvic floors just as much as people who go to pelvic floor physical therapy. Now, that's a general statement. That isn't going to be true for everybody, but that's a pretty cool statistic that working our core like that in Pilates, in a good Pilates environment, can give us just as much improvement. So that just goes to show you that there's multiple ways to fix this. Gymnastics conditioning can be really good if it's done in a healthy way. And if you check out some of my earlier calls on diastasis that I've done, if you have trouble locating those, you can always email me. I go through a lot of really safe core exercises that can be done. And again, they're primarily going to work best for those who have the weak pelvic floors, but there are ways to do them if your pelvic floor is tighter, and I'll go over some of those tonight. And so we did work on that coordination of the TA muscles of the transverse abdominis with the pelvic floor in that seated position. That can be a great drill, a great lower level drill. If you're not ready for the hardcore conditioning, you're just placing your hand on your belly. You can even do it standing up, but I find a lot of people find that it's easier to do when they're seated. You're drawing your pelvic floor up, relaxing it, trying to feel just a light tension in your muscles. You're not doing like a 6-pack crunch. You're just drawing up and engaging those TAs. So like I had said, if this all feels super overwhelming to you, just go back to the breathing piece, sitting in a chair and breathing all the way down as fast as you can. And it does get better with practice. That is the go-to. And a lot of people that try all these fancy things, they're not doing that. And that's really where they should start. So you could do it standing up, but I do find in seated it works really well. Taking that breath in, really feeling how deep it can go, and then letting it out. Try 5 of those. That's always going to be good, no matter what camp you're in with tightness or weakness. So I know that was a lot of information. I want to give you guys a few more exercises you can try. If anybody has questions about anything I just talked about, now would be a great time to ask. Okay, cool. So we are going to do a 90-90 exercise next. And this one will have different cues depending upon if you came out as tight or weak in the testing. I will have more detailed tutorial on 90-90 on my diastasis calls that were earlier in this series. Particularly call 1 and 2 goes over that more, but for today, we're gonna just do a quick version of it to work the pelvic floor side of things. So you wanna lie on your back, and it's great if you can have a pillow or 2 under your head and shoulders to help round your spine a bit. There's different ways to do 90-90, but all of them involve the legs being in this shape against the wall. And we're just gonna do this simple basic one of lying on your back with nothing between our knees or anything like that. What I'm gonna have everybody do is inhale into your back and sides, ribs as best as you can, feeling those ribs open. Exhale. And as you exhale, if your pelvic floor was determined to be looser, you can draw your pelvic floor up. Try to do that without squeezing your butt. And then as you exhale, you're going to relax that. So the key is to engage when your abs engage and relax when your abs relax. Pelvic floor timed with the abs. If you have a tighter pelvic floor, I'm going to recommend that you don't engage your pelvic floor while we do this. So we're going to do 2 more breaths together with that in mind, whichever cue is appropriate for you. Inhale into your back and sides. Exhale. And then either yes or no with pelvic floor, depending on who you are. Let's do another one. Something as simple as that can really work wonders. And there's definitely ways to advance 90-90. If you check out my call 2 from the diastasis series, I go over a lot of the 90-90 tips, but that one's just the most basic one to get started with it. And so I mentioned already the release work with the ball. So the 90-90 is a great place to work. That's the first thing. Release with the ball is great. That the one that you sit with the ball under your sit bones and around the sit bones. The one where you're sitting in the chair and you're drawing your pelvic floor up. And feeling the connection of your hands. That's a great exercise. You can do that also, when you're watching TV or whatever too. And then, let's see here, does this work? So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys an exercise called an iliacus pullback next. The iliacus is a muscle in our hip. And this one is really, really powerful for helping, especially when we have one-sided pelvic floor tightness. So say if when you squeeze your legs in on that inner thigh test, you found that your right leg was overworking compared to your left. Then if that was the leg that was, you would want to lie on your left side and have your right leg up. We're going to place our feet against the wall for this. It's nice to have something under your head, such as a yoga block, if you have that, or a pillow. If you don't, no worries, you can rest your hand on your shoulder. We're going to lie on our side, and we're going to have our feet flat against the wall. Okay, and then the roller, oops, come on, roller. The roller is going to go between your knees. If you don't have a roller, a yoga block can do as well. I just prefer the roller a bit just because it will slide, and you'll see what I mean in a second. We're going to start with our right foot higher than our knee. Okay, and then the rollers between our thighs. We're going to form a mini side plank under our waist by pushing our hip into the floor. So I'm pushing my hip into the floor. Then I can actually move that so you guys can see. I can slip my hand underneath. But if I didn't push my hip down, I'd get stuck. I wouldn't be able to get through. So we want to form that mini side plank under our waist. We're going to take an inhale breath. And on the exhale, we're lightly squeezing the roller, and very, very subtly, we're drawing this knee back. It's probably too small to see, especially if you're looking at me on the computer. But you're going to inhale, bring your knee back to where it started, and exhale, squeeze and draw back. Now my feet aren't moving, they're staying the same. My hips aren't moving, they're staying the same. If you've gotten askew, just situate yourself back up to neutral again. There's no rush, but you're taking an inhale breath, exhale, squeeze and draw back. And I do recommend resetting each time, because if you don't, you'll probably kind of just start like flopping backward, and we really do want to keep the hips steady here. So if you haven't tried it yet, go ahead and get in the position and give it a try. And what we're trying to imagine here is that our femur bone, our thigh bone, is getting pulled into the hip socket, which I know can be a little bit of an esoteric thing to imagine. I'm going to show you guys on my pelvis in a second. Grab the pelvis. Okay, so here's the pelvis, and we're on our side, and we're trying to pull the femur back, because the femur might be a little bit forward. Okay, so it's pulling it back into the socket so that it fits nicely in there. And that's what that exercise is doing. If you had the tighter left side, you could do it on the left. If you feel like you were even, then you could do it on both sides. And the other cool thing about this exercise is it can be really, really helpful if you experience pinching in your front hip. Say if you do something like this, where you're pulling your knee in and it really pinches in the front, unless you're a little bit on the older side, I'm talking, 60 plus, which even then, like, they can have the same issue of their femur being forward in the socket. And even if you have something like arthritis in your hip, which really can happen at any age, yes, the arthritis is going to cause pain, but we also can have pain because our bones are in alignment. It's the same reason why we can go to a chiropractor and oftentimes feel better. The problem is it doesn't always stick. So while chiropractors are amazing and we need them at times, the ideal would be that the bones would stay put. And if you have to keep going back, that's a sign that maybe there's more you could be doing at home to help yourself stay well. I'm going to give you guys one more TA exercise that you can work on, and you can get more of them in the diastasis calls if you want more. So with this, you're on your back, just like I am now. We're going to have our hand over our lower belly. You're going to inhale breath. Exhale. If your pelvic floor was tighter, please don't do the kegel. If it was loose in the testing, you can do a kegel. You're going to hold that. And then if that feels like a little bit of engagement under your hands, that's great. You can experiment with marching a leg to 90 degrees, slowly lower it. Your goal is stability here. You can feel your hip bones, make sure they aren't moving. And the big priority here is we want our abs to flatten, because if we're using our TAs, those muscles flatten us. Those are the ones that work hand in hand with pelvic floor. If our muscles pop up like that, we're tending to use more of the six-pack or rectus muscles, which are already very strong from gymnastics and gymnastics conditioning. We don't generally need to work those when we're trying to do pelvic floor physical therapy. type exercises or rehabilitation or corrective exercises. Okay, so we're just marching the legs, trying to feel that our abs have flattened as we're doing so. If the marching's too much, you can just do the engagement with each breath. So inhale breath, exhale, feel the engagement, let it go. If you're doing the pelvic floor drawing up, be sure to let it go each and every breath. We do not want to get into the habit of holding that the whole time. That is not good for your pelvic floor by any means. Okay, so those are great ways to get connected with our pelvic floor with some basic exercises. I do plan to do full calls on exercise circuits for those with pelvic floor tightness and pelvic floor weakness. So you guys can look forward to that. But in the meantime, you can start working with these more basic exercises. And I really can't reiterate enough that you should hold off on tons of ab work if your pelvic floor is tight, because you can cause what's called a pelvic organ prolapse if you push through this tightness and really try to work your abs. Because if your pelvic floor is tight, what ends up happening is when you engage your abs, you put a lot of pressure down. The problem with that is that there's nowhere for the pressure to go because the muscles are so tight, and then something has to give. And if you have a pelvic organ prolapse, you can fix those generally without surgery. Some people will need surgery for those, but it's like a whole additional problem that you could have. And I mean, some people might even have it without knowing it. But my point is that we don't want to cause harm to our body doing things in the wrong order. So definitely, if you find that you have pelvic floor tightness, you don't want to go crazy working your abs until you get on top of that. And the ways to get on top of it, like I said, the release with the ball is great. You can work your TAs to get them stronger. You can work your glutes, you can work your hamstrings, and you can work the muscles around your hips. And all of that is much safer for you than overworking abs. Some people do need manual work. And if you need that, that would be a case where you'd want to go in person and get that. That's going to be a specialized treatment far beyond the scope of what I do as a personal trainer. But there are resources for that. And if you need help, I actually have a lot of colleagues that do that work that are extremely reputable and great at what they do. And so I can always help hook you up with that. You can send me an email if you need help with that. So I went over a lot of stuff today with the kinetic chain. And what that means is it means basically from our head all the way down to our feet, we're going to have muscles that influence how our pelvic floor works. And so you don't want to, just think, oh, it's just my pelvic floor's fault. The pelvic floor is actually bearing the brunt of what the other muscles oftentimes aren't doing. And so keep that in mind, that it's a full body thing. It's a pressure thing. So if you can handle the amount of pressure of walking around your neighborhood, that's great. But then when you want to go tumble and it's a lot more pressure, you need to be a lot stronger. And if you have some tightness problems that don't show up when you're walking around your neighborhood that do at gymnastics, you're asking more of your body, and you need to show up and do the work if you want your body to be super, super healthy and functioning at its best. And the cool thing is your pelvic floor is part of your core. So the stronger it is and the healthier it is, the better your core is going to perform and the better you're going to be at all your events. So it's actually kind of cool how you're going to get better at gymnastics by working on this stuff. So it's definitely well worth it to do so. I did want to mention one more thing about breathing stuff before we end this call. So there's something called paradoxical breathing. And if you take a look at me, and then I'm going to take my breath, let me get rid of my hair. So I'm going to take my breath, and there should be a bit of rise here, and a little bit here is fine, and back here. That's fine. What we don't want to see is okay, and that might look really silly, but I will tell you right now, when I ask people who work with me to show me a breath, I swear to you, 3/4 of them go like this. I breathed. And I'm not making fun of them. I used to be a person that did that as well. It's just that it's so bad for you to breathe like that. Like, it's not good. But once you're aware of it, then it can really help. So on the diastasis calls, I did cover a lot with the 360 breath. I'm going to just real quick talk about it again tonight. So with the 360 breath, what we want to do is we can place our index finger next to our side rib and our thumb way in the back. Okay, we're going to take a breath. We're going to try to make those finger and thumb move when we breathe. Now, if you do that, you should find that you automatically don't do this because this is going to help you move those parts of your hand. It's going to actually take away from that. So just by having, instead of thinking, I don't want to lift here, then it's like, well, what do I do? Well, don't think it that way. Think like this. Think, can I move my side and back ribs? And you'll find that you'll naturally not want to shrug up as much. And you're still going to move with your belly. Don't get me wrong. There are times when I tell people not to move their belly just because I really want to emphasize this. But in the end, we're trying to get a 360 breath. So 360 is going all the directions. It's like an umbrella opening and closing, or like a balloon filling and closing. The reason I ask people to focus a lot on back and side ribs is because those are the ribs that usually don't move as well in people. And feel free to try each side, because I find a lot of people will breathe great on one side and the other side isn't as good. And so it's nice to think about what can I do versus like what is not good or what I shouldn't do. So paradoxical breathing is breathing instead up versus the out in the lower parts of our ribs. That is a problematic thing for our pelvic floor, because then what happens is our pelvic floor is not getting that stimulation, like I said before, of the lungs coming down, hitting this diaphragm, which moves the organs, which moves this diaphragm, and then comes up. So we take a breath, our lungs descend, they push our organs push on our pelvic floor gently and naturally, and then it comes back. If we don't get that stimulation, the pelvic floor is just kind of like sitting there doing nothing, and it tends to get out of shape real quick. So last thing I wanted to say is that if you're doing an exercise, because a lot of people will ask me like, can I do sit-ups? Can I do V-ups? Can I do this? Can I do that? If you notice that you're doing something that we call bearing down, which is basically, if this is not making like obvious sense to you, if you think about having a bowel movement, generally what you'll do is push down to have that. So that's what we're talking about. If you have to push pressure down into your pelvic organs to generate the force needed to do that exercise, I would not do it, because that is going to increase the risk of dysfunction, the risk of prolapse. We don't want to be doing exercise that we have to do that with. And so I would say pass on those. And once you're in a great place with your pelvic floor, you're not having symptoms, you can potentially revisit doing some of those things. But I don't recommend doing that if you have symptoms, because you're just making the situation worse, most likely. So I would say no to things that cause you to bear down, yes to everything else. Pretty much as simple as that. So that was a ton of info. You guys did really well hanging in there. I'm so happy that you were coming on the call tonight and that you're interested in learning this information. I think it's really smart. So if anybody has any other questions, I will be here for a minute or so, and I'll hang out and just wait. And if you don't want to say it to the group, you can always type it into the chat, and you can send it directly to me if you would like. And while I'm waiting to see if there's questions, I'm going to put the links to the past calls if anybody wants that. I'm going to grab that link right now. Okay, let's see here. I've got this one. Pop that into the chat. So we've got, I think there's 5 calls that have been on there, and I'll put tonight's on there too. The cool thing as well is that when you start working this, you'll start to organically work on it during the day once you make that connection. And it's pretty cool. And you'll actually be able to incorporate some of it into your other workouts, like when you're doing a hollow hold or when you're doing weight training. So at first it might feel like, oh, I have this like whole separate thing I have to do, but you can incorporate it pretty easily. And the exercises are pretty gentle and like not too strenuous. So I find that by even setting aside like 2 to 3 days a week to work on them for even just 10 minutes, that can really get you pretty far. And then you can take it to your workout and kind of build it more into your life. And it's really not a big deal, but it's definitely worth taking the time to connect and to understand this part of your body, because it's a part of your body that has a lot of, potential to help your strength. All right, so it looks like there aren't any questions, so I will be signing off here, but I thank you guys for joining, and stay tuned for my separate calls that will dive even more deeply into tight pelvic floor, weaker pelvic floor, and leaking, all as separate topics, and so we'll be able to dive even deeper into them. Have a great night, everybody. You're welcome.